Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. For more on where national security stands 15 years after the attacks of 9/11, we're joined by CBS News senior national security analyst and former Homeland Security advisor to President George W. Bush, Fran Townsend. Stephen Brill contributes to The Atlantic and is the author of this month's cover story, Are We Any Safer? And Jeffrey Goldberg writes for The Atlantic, and he's also a visiting fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Steve, I want to start with you. You worked for a year on this article, Are We Any Safer? And so I apologize, but I'll ask you if you can boil it down in an answer.
Only 20 words.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Well, we're a lot stronger because of the work that people like Fran did and tens of thousands of others, and the $1 trillion we spent. We strengthened our defenses, but the nature of the threat has changed and evolved in a way that arguably in many ways makes us less safe.
And Fran, are we adapting to that environment that Steve describes?
You'll appreciate, John, what happens is we never adapt fast enough, and that's always a concern. And so, as you heard from the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the threat has metastasized and spread. We have more bad guys in more different places now. And that's a significant threat. And you add to that the internet and the radicalization that happens over the internet. We've been very late to that game as a government across two administrations, frankly. And that's a problem. We don't treat the internet as a battle space as we do land, air, and sea.
Jeffrey, go ahead, Steve.
Let me just add that there are some old kinds of threats that we could deal with. Because the threat has evolved to lone wolves, people acting independently, the one thing that one of the political parties doesn't seem to want to do when it comes to Homeland Security is do what most other countries do, which is keep assault weapons, military weapons, away from terrorists. I mean, that is one easy way to adapt that doesn't cost us money and that is logical and that works.
Jeffrey, let me ask you on this broader question. Barack Obama came into office with a certain set of challenges. In terms of the Are We Any Safer question, what does Barack Obama leave for his successor on that question?
Right. So Barack Obama came in with what he would refer to as a very messy barn. He was handed a global economic crisis, 180,000 troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, bin Laden alive, and he's been preoccupied, and his administration has been preoccupied with handing off to his successor a, quote, clean barn. The barn is not that clean, unfortunately. You have vast ungoverned spaces, even though ISIS is being rolled back in Iraq and Syria to some degree. You have ISIS, an organization that didn't even exist when he became president, new forms of terrorism. On the other hand, you have to say this, and you say this about George W. Bush too, after 9/11, it's somewhat miraculous, but we have not had a 9/11 sized terror attack in the United States. And I do think that's somewhat miraculous given how far behind we were. So he is not handing off a perfect situation to his successor, but it is a manageable situation still, I think.
Well, it is miraculous, but the miracle didn't just happen. It's because of the work that lots and lots of people did to make it happen. I think we ought to acknowledge that today.
Steve, let me ask you, you write in your piece, our imagination is limited to the day's headlines. Policymakers fight the war that made those headlines, not the war that might come next. You mentioned assault weapons. That is something that's been in the headlines. That is something people have talked about and debated. But what's not in the headlines that people should be thinking about?
Well, let's take something that was very much in the headlines right after 9/11, the bioterror threat, the anthrax attacks. That is, if anything, more of a threat today than it was 15 years ago, but we've done nothing to develop the technology that could really detect that kind of attack because it just happened to fall out of the headlines.
Fran, what do you think of that?
Well, I think in fairness, across the WMD spectrum, whether you're talking about radiological, nuclear, or chemical, we have taken different pieces of that and addressed it. We haven't done it in the comprehensive way that Steve's talking about. Part of that is what I call the tyranny of the inbox. You know, no president plans on Katrina, no president plans on 9/11. And so the distraction of the everyday, the crisis, takes away from the more strategic planning that needs to be done. I do think, I come back to this, we can't kill our way out of this problem, no matter how much progress we've made in killing bin Laden and other leaders. The fact is you've got to address the ideology, and I don't think we've done an adequate job, nor have we spent the adequate resources against that problem.
Jeffrey, getting to that question of ideology, you talked about ungoverned spaces.
Yeah.
During the immediate aftermath of 9/11, there was a lot of talk about we have to get them over there or they'll come over here. Right. What's the state of that argument? Is that still useful? Is it still the worry?
I mean, it's a useful framework to talk about this, but to add to what Steve is saying, if you have a lone wolf problem and if you have an internet problem, you have a self-radicalization through the internet, then the people we're fighting are often people in the United States who don't even know at this moment that they're they haven't been radicalized yet. And so, going to what Fran is talking about, this is the danger. We are safer in a sort of broad bureaucratic way. That our defenses have been strengthened. We spend $1 trillion strengthening those defenses, but we have no answer yet for the ideologies that radicalize people right here at home, and that is the danger. We are both safer and more unsafe at the same time. It's not a satisfying answer, but I think it's the correct answer.
I'm glad you didn't write my headline.
Sorry, we have a little bit of news here. I'm going to interrupt that Hillary Clinton left the events at Ground Zero unexpectedly today. The campaign says she felt overheated and went to her daughter's apartment and is feeling much better. But a person briefed on the matter tells CBS News that it appears she fainted when she got into her vehicle. We'll keep you updated as we learn more. Steve, I want to go back to you on this question of the tyranny of the inbox. You've studied a lot of complicated systems, whether it's in Homeland Security here or New York school systems. Let's find some, is there optimism? In other words, in a system where there's tyranny of the inbox, you talked to Jay Johnson, and he said, we've got to prioritize and risks. Is there a way to break out of that tyranny of the inbox?
Well, you have to have the capacity to take a step back at the same time that you're worried about what's in your inbox. And I think that increasingly from 9/11 on, the Bush administration made all kinds of management improvements as they learned. The Obama administration, I think, has done a much better job. Jay Johnson seems to be the one secretary who is finally getting his arms around the management of this agency. But it is really hard because when you're dealing with a situation where at any moment you can have an emergency that you have to pay attention to. To have someone writing an article in the Atlantic saying, hey, you should worry about dirty bombs because they're really a potential threat. And what you're looking at is that morning's intel briefing that tells you exactly what that threat is that day. That's a hard thing to balance.
Fran, finally to you on the social media piece. You said not enough is being done. Is there, if I were coming in and I were president, what's your recommendation that I do right away?
Look at what we spend on our military and on the physical battle space to go after the ungoverned and poorly governed spaces, and then look at what you're spending to combat it on the internet. The answer is it's so disproportionate. You've got to really make the commitment that this is a battle space that you're going to fight to control and fight to win in terms of the ideology, and if you're not going to spend it there, you're not going to win there.
But what would you spend it on?
Oh, it's across a spectrum of things. You have both defensive operations and offensive operations. Some of it is covert, some of it is overt. You need to have the full spectrum.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you, and we'll be right back with our political panel. We turn now to politics. Joining us is Wall Street Journal columnist and CBS News contributor Peggy Noonan. Jamelle Bouie is chief political correspondent for Slate magazine and a CBS News political analyst, and Amy Walter is the national editor of the Cook Political Report. I want to read this statement from the Clinton campaign. Secretary Clinton attended the September 11th commemoration ceremony, for just an hour and 30 minutes this morning to pay her respects and greet some of the families of the fallen. During the ceremony, she felt overheated, so departed to go to her daughter's apartment and is feeling much better. Now, Peggy Noonan, I want to start on something Hillary Clinton said recently, some remarks that have gotten her into trouble. We played them at the top of the show, in which she said she wanted to be grossly generalistic, but that some Trump supporters fall into what she called the basket of deplorables, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic. She then put out a statement saying that she was wrong to have characterized that as half of Donald Trump's supporters. Where are we now on this?
It is, she used memorable language, basket of deplorables. An original and perhaps startling phrase, but it was memorable, therefore it will be memorable as a gaffe. It was a mistake. You don't write off, in moral and ethical terms, half of the supporters of the person you're running against, meaning 1/4 of the voters in the United States, as such nefarious and rather wicked people. She did walk it back. She said she shouldn't have said half, but I think at the end of the day, it was the kind of divisive and embittering language that will harken back to two other gaffes. One is Mitt Romney's 47%. The other is Barack Obama's bitter clingers.
So, Jamel, the question here is Hillary Clinton, on the one hand, talks about better, stronger together. So her unity has been her message. It's on her plane, for goodness sakes. Right. On the other hand, she gave a speech, not a gaffe, but a full speech about the connection of Donald Trump to the alt-right. Right. So this is both a gaffe from which she must retreat and also strategy. How do you see it?
Exactly right. I'm inclined to see it as strategy and not so much as a gaffe, because when I heard the remark, my first question was, well, is this true, right? Regardless of how it sounds or what it looks like, what is the case about Donald Trump supporters? And if you break down the numbers and you look at the Real Clear Politics average, and it gives Trump about 43% of the registered voters, so there's about 31 million people. Compare that to polls that show 65 to 70% of all Republicans who say Barack Obama either wasn't born in the United States or is a Muslim. You look at pilot data from the American National Election Study, and it shows upwards of 40% of Republicans saying things like, blacks are more violent, blacks are lazier, Muslims are more violent, Muslims are lazier. Among Trump supporters in particular, 60, 50, 70% of them agree with statements that political scientists categorize as being explicitly racist. So I'm looking at Clinton's statement, and half, which is about 31 million people again, doesn't really seem that out of bounds. 40 to 50% of Republicans, I would say, looking at the full spectrum of data, agree with beliefs that we would categorize as explicitly prejudiced. So regardless of whether or not Clinton needs to walk it back or not, I think she's being correct and accurate.
And I think this gets to the bigger challenge, though, for Hillary Clinton, which is she has predicated her strategy and the race so much on who she's not, and we haven't really heard a lot about who she is. And so I know there's a Stronger Together is on the plane. I don't know what that means. What comes after Stronger Together? Right. What does that mean for me as an average American in terms of what my schools are going to look like, what my life is going to be, what the future is going to be? And so we've spent a whole lot of time in this campaign hearing a lot about how terrible the other person is, how I'm an alternative to that, but it's flipping the page to, and what comes next. And this is why you saw the poll today, the Washington Post poll that came out today, Hillary Clinton up in the national poll. But the enthusiasm gap between Trump supporters and her supporters was pretty significant. I think part of that is this sense, even from folks who are Democrats who want to support her, who say, I don't know where the there is.
Right.
Where's the there?
And the campaign strategically had been telegraphing that she was going to offer some solution speeches. And so instead of talking about solutions, she's now talking about a message she wants to get across, but not with this kind of blaring volume.
Yeah, I do think this may be part of the Stronger Together message, though, because offering yourself as a unity figure doesn't actually preclude yourself from identifying a portion of the electorate that does hold these views.
Peggy, does Donald Trump have something to run with here, or because there are Republicans who are nervous about these elements within the Donald Trump forces? So
Sure, look, there is an alt-right. We've all talked about it, but what I think is really going on in the race is that a lot of people, even after 25 years as a leader in the United States, a lot of people don't like or trust or feel approving of Hillary Clinton. At the same time, there are plenty of people, as Anthony said, who are not confident that Donald Trump has the stuff to be a president. I think one of the interesting things going on with the Trump campaign is that they must know they've got to start getting a higher proportion of Republicans following them. They've got about 85% Republican support. If you're going to compete, in a place like Pennsylvania, you need those suburbs that will go for a Republican they feel they can trust, but if they kind of think he's a ruffian now, they're the people he's got to go for.
And it's those suburbanites who the Clinton campaign is targeting with this talk
Yes,
of the
of course,
alt-right
'cause, yeah.
and all of that. Amy, let me switch to the question of commander-in-chief. That was a part of the conversation this week. It seems pretty clear. Hillary Clinton is has the kind of experience and the knowledge about the various different countries. Donald Trump has a more improvisational approach. How do you think that sorts out with the voters?
But I do think at the end of the day, this is where voters, their hesitancy translates into difficulty voting for Donald Trump. If you see poll after poll, it says two things. One, she has a lead on who do you think will be stronger as commander-in-chief, and two, who do you ultimately think is going to be president of the United States? Who do you ultimately think is going to win? And poll after poll shows over 50% of voters saying that Hillary Clinton, they believe that she's going to win. That has been a more predictive question than who are you voting for today.
Yeah.
In the Washington Post poll out today, 58% believe that she's ultimately going to win. And I think it comes down to that core question, which is if you don't believe that this person, whoever fill in the blank, in this case it's Donald Trump, is qualified to be commander-in-chief, is qualified for that position, can you actually vote for them? That is a very difficult bridge to cross.
Right. The question is whether if he can cross that by just doing
More of what
little.
he keeps doing.
Yeah, or Jamel, there are people that I talk to, and we see it in the survey data as well, which is people think, you can have advisors and you can learn in the job. And he's been successful in private business, so sure, he can be successful in this. Is that enough to clear that threshold question for him?
I'm not sure that it is, because those characteristics have always been a part of Donald Trump going back to last year. And so it appears not to be enough for voters, even if the Trump campaign continues to double down on it, saying we have good advisors and so on and so forth, to clear that bridge. I think there's a real danger here because, as we saw last week in the NBC forum, Trump does have a hard time talking about national security and foreign policy issues in detail. He can kind of translate feeling and sort of conviction, but when it comes to details and being able to put forth plans, he struggles.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Clinton's weakness here is that she is perceived to have this detailed sense of who the president or the undersecretary of defense in Pakistan is. She knows that. She knows his name. She's had dealings with him. But she has no perceived strategic vision. People can't really tell you what she'd do in the world. They feel they can tell you, well, Trump will be tough. They have an overall sense of him. They don't have an overall sense of what she would mean in the world, of a strategic Hillary Clinton, this is what I stand for.
Mike Pence compares Donald Trump to Reagan in this regard. You know from
Don't
Reagan.
do
You know from Reagan.
Yes, you knew you were going to get that question.
Go ahead.
You know from Reagan.
Well, I have written on this. I do not see the explicit similarities that many of Trump's supporters see. Although Reagan was, in some respects, an outsider in politics, I really can't take that far. I think I hate to play the Reagan card, if you know what I mean, and say, hey, buddy, I knew Ronald Reagan. But I do not see a depth of similarity in their background or temperament.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm afraid we're already out
Thank
of time.
you, John,
Sorry.
so much.
Sorry. We'll be right back. The new Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture opens next week. CBS This Morning will be there for their entire broadcast tomorrow. And CBS This Morning co-host Gayle King is with us for a preview. Gayle, thanks for coming in on your day off.
John.
I want to get your impressions about the museum since you've been there, but I first want to play a little bit of an interview that Charlie Rose did for your broadcast tomorrow with Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker. They talk about what it means, what the museum, I should say, means to them.
This is a building that I wish my grandparents could have seen open. I know it would have given them a sense of legitimacy, a sense that they belong, that America is embracing the African American community in a really, not a symbolic way, but in a deeply substantive way. And I thought about it, I kind of joked as I was coming in, but to cross the threshold of the building, that moment of walking into this building, I just almost felt as if my ancestors were rejoicing in that moment.
I hope that one of the beauties of this
museum being here will be an understanding and appreciation of the depth of the pain, agony, and tragedy of slavery. I hope that the weight of the past will slow your gait and bow your head. And as you walk out here, I hope that the sense of freedom and a sense of expectations will overwhelm you, and that you will feel individually responsible for making America the most amazing country for every single citizen in our land.
That's amazing, Gail.
Wow.
Really powerful.
Wow, I was going to say, John Dickerson, I just got goosebumps listening to both of them speak. Shows you how Democrats and Republicans can come together and unite for a common cause. That was very powerful what Tim Scott just said.
Yeah, now you've been in there, right?
I've been
In
there.
the
You know, when
museum?
I was there, it was a construction zone. So, but I saw it when it was just a drawing on a desk and when there was a replica. So to see it coming out of the ground, I think Nora O'Donnell had the best description. She said it looks like a crown there on the Washington Mall. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like the other kids in the class. It doesn't look like it has its own look that's very unique, starting with the color of it, starting with the shape of it. But what that building represents is massive.
And what does it represent? Give me the full spectrum.
Well, when I look at the full spectrum, I think, you know, we're starting with slavery. And slavery is something that's very unpleasant. Nobody really wants to acknowledge it. But until you acknowledge it, it's very hard to move forward. So in that museum, John, you have the shackles that were put on children. You have people's slave papers. You have an actual slave ship that Lonnie Bunch, we'll talk to him tomorrow, you know, has a great story on how they got that. An actual slave ship. The casket of Emmett Till, which was a very pivotal turning point in the civil rights movement, all the way up to the election and the inauguration of Barack Obama in one building. Wow.
Yeah.
Just think about all that that represents.
And also Harriet Tubman's prayer shawl there.
Is there. But it's bigger than just Black history. I think it's really all of our history. There was a Ku Klux Klan robe there. There was Nat Turner's Bible that was donated by a white family. So, you know, people, you know, when the museum first started, Lonnie Bunch, who's did yeoman's work, they had no exhibits, and now they have over 35,000.
Tell us who else is going to be on the show tomorrow.
Tomorrow, Colin Powell, you know him very well. He was on the board, he will be there. Lonnie Bunch, Loretta Lynch, our Attorney General, will be there. And John Lewis, who they call the godfather of the museum because he was very instrumental in it becoming what it is today.
And what's it going to be like for you to broadcast from there tomorrow? I mean, you're in history. It's opening this amazing thing.
Well, as you know, when CBS This Morning takes a show on the road, it must be a very big deal.
Yeah.
So the fact that we are going there live and pulling out of the stops means a lot to me personally. But I think it means a lot to all of us who will be, you know, it will open your hearts and open your mind. I think Lonnie Bunch said, you know, we want it to be a place of celebration. We want it to be a place of remembrance. But it's going to be a living museum that's always changing. Smiles and tears.
We'll celebrate and remember with you tomorrow.
All
Thanks
right.
so
Thank
much,
you, John.
Gail.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks all of you for being here, and we'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.